Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the special meeting of the Richmond Select Board. Before I begin, I just want to give a shout out to my mom. Her birthday is today. Yay. And also to Richmond resident Rod West, who has recently completed the ice skating rink at the elementary school again. Rod's done this for many years. So thank you, Rod. Rod's one of the people that just appears with a cape and in moments of need, he's very willing to lend his time and his equipment and his generosity to help the town. So we appreciate that. Before we begin, would anybody care to make a public comment?
The papers on the budget.
Papers.
Printed version.
I don't have a printed version.
But we'll be showing it on the screen.
Yeah.
What's that?
We'll be showing it on the big screen and they are available for download on the town website.
We didn't bring
Get them in the
printed.
town offices here. I don't download anything.
Yeah, if you stop by my office, I can give you a
Okay.
copy.
Josh, board, any additions, deletions, or modifications to tonight's agenda? Okay. My printer's out of ink, so I'm trying to pull the memo up on the iPad here. Okay. So first on the agenda is consideration of approving the fiscal year 26 budget to be considered for approval by the voters at town meeting. Josh, did you want to lead this discussion?
Sure. I think this is our sixth or maybe seventh special meeting just to focus on the budget. At the last meeting, we got to a point where it seemed like the board was mostly in consensus with where we ended up on the budget. I suggested that we meet again today to try to finalize that, look at the warning, and then just, give ourselves a little extra time to be ahead and prepared for the January 21st meeting to actually finalize the town warning. I also wanted to just present a cleaned up version of the budget. We've been using some lines to kind of reduce lines and put in some notes and things on the budget. So the budget that we have in the packet, which I'll share a screen on, let me make sure I got the right one up here.
So Josh, while you're pulling that up, I just want to make a point that in the next fiscal year, we're actually expending less money than we are in the current fiscal year. But due to unanticipated depletion of cash on hand, there is a net increase in the tax rate.
And
Maybe explain why about
yeah,
how funds were
Underspent?
The underspent funds, which historically roll over,
Right.
are gone to pay for flood expenses. That
And
wasn't
then
very
some.
articulate.
Yeah.
and I
Go
just
ahead.
give just two quick updates, and then we can kind of go wherever the board or the public would like. Just wanted to make sure that the board and the public knew. So when we last left, we had the tax rate at 6.83%. As we went in and cleaned everything up, we did find that our figure for the deputy town manager position, changing one
You got
position
that
to that.
backward. It was at 6.76.
Oh, sorry, it was 6.76. We found that we under budgeted or underestimated by $800 the amount for the deputy town manager position. So a slight increase there from what we talked about last week. And then we took another look at the property taxes to support exemptions for veterans, which is on the revenue side of the budget over here. And this is basically an additional amount of exemption of property value that Richmond voters have allowed veterans to take. So the voters have to kind of make up that. So as we went there and recalculated that, it went up a little bit. So it went from 6.76% increase at the end of last meeting up to 6.83%. So that's shown right here. I'll touch on what Bard said, if you want me to explain that. So as Bard noted,
You've got a
yeah, I'll mute somebody here, it looks like. Is that Lisa maybe? Is it Lisa?
no.
Couldn't tell.
Stephanie is unmuted.
Okay, well, I'll just mute Lisa for a minute. So where Bard was going was the expenses in fiscal year 25 were $4,915,858. In fiscal year 26, the expenses are actually budgeted to go down to $4,870,056. The reason why the tax rate is going up is based on the amount of unassigned funds. So we have unassigned and restricted funds are money that's left over in the budget in highway or any other department that is unspent at the end of the fiscal year. We get there by having increased revenue that we didn't anticipate or budget for, or if we're underspent in a department, like for instance, police lately, we've been underspending because we haven't been fully staffed. So we've budgeted for, say, 4 officers. We've only had maybe 1 officer. So that money doesn't go away. It's reported at the end of the year as unassigned funds. The select board passed a policy last fall based on advice from the auditors to retain 15% of unassigned funds as you go into the next year. So we go through an exercise each fall to look at the unassigned funds and say, what's our projection for the end of this year? Where do we end last year? What would get us to 15% of the budget? And how much can we use to roll back into the budget? So, and still keep that 15%. I'll get you one second. So last year we used $433,186. This year we're budgeted for $78,647. The reason why that's so low this year compared to last year is we had nearly $2 million in flood expenses that were mostly paid for with the use of unassigned funds. And that's why that number goes down.
I just wanted to clarify one thing that I get asked about that 15%. That 15% is not a rainy day fund. In fact, law prevents towns from having a rainy day fund. It's not a super deluxe extra reserve that we can tap on in times of utter emergency. It's primarily to be able to respond for cash flow so that we're not having to cash things out, just be able to pay bills. There's a number of reasons, but it's a cash flow fund, if you will, and it's not there as a last line of defense reserve.
Does it keep building?
It depends on the year.
I mean, I understand that. So what can you spend it for then?
So I think that was the description that you just heard. So if you hold 15% and we had 20% left over, you take the 5% and offset next year's taxes. We've been doing that for a while to cap it at 15%. You got extra money, draw down next year's tax obligations. And you can do that year after year, except for this year when we spend it on flood related expenses that we expect a lot of money to come in from FEMA, but the typical length of repayment from FEMA is what, 2 years?
2 to 3.
Well, we're about a year. So this past summer and fall, we started to receive money from the 2023 flood. So we're anticipating that by this summer and fall, we'll start to receive money from the 2024 flood.
Can that be put in the budget? Can you say, I expect to receive X number $1,000?
It's tricky because we don't know for a fact when FEMA will pay. FEMA will say, we expect to have the money to you on approximately this date, but FEMA is not master of its own destiny.
I understand.
And so we're very skittish about saying we will have that money, because what happens if there's a delay and it doesn't come in?
So
I would only add that this after January 20th,
Which is
the money coming from the federal government is perhaps less predictable than in the past.
The incoming administration has vowed to slash
I got
FEMA's
it.
budget.
Okay, I'm trying to make the connection.
We have a
I'm a
handout.
little slow.
I don't think so.
But to answer your question, Jack, the current year's taxes were greatly helped by rolling over the last year's unassigned.
Yeah, that you didn't,
We didn't have that luxury.
unassigned funds.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess this is following up on Jack's question a little bit. I'm looking at our neighbors and looking at our budget, and the situation with weather related and natural disaster damage, and this sort of to and from flow of cash between the town and the federal government. Certainly it has added more uncertainty to budgeting, with the frequency and the size of those costs. I'm just wondering if there isn't, we've been handling it fairly well, I think, compared to our neighbors. And my hats off to the select board for doing that. But there are limits, and we have been depending on near to full repayment. And as Bard just mentioned, there's some uncertainty about that. And even regardless of the change in the administration, what's happening in Los Angeles right now is going to severely tax FEMA. And that's, you're talking about a natural disaster on a scale that nationally is going to be hard to deal with. So what I'm getting to is I wonder whether we shouldn't be on a going forward basis thinking about, I don't know, having some kind of reserve fund specifically for natural disaster relief to, explicitly to build up more of a cushion. And I don't know what's allowed by the state as far as that goes.
So I can.
Go ahead, yeah.
So I know when I first started here in 2018, we actually did have a fund called Rainy Day Fund. And aptly named, correct? Given our recent history the last couple of years. The auditors specifically said that you cannot have a fund that is just for set aside for emergency response. So we took that out. We divested that money back into the general fund and into unassigned funds. What I think we've learned from the past two floods is that, having the 15% on hand or potentially more, this year we had more because of police vacancy savings, was extremely helpful to get through the emergency. But we've also learned that if we got to a point where we had a flood, we didn't have enough money, there are some short-term lending options out there that we can get to quickly. And then there's some bonding options that would come after that. They would come with interest. FEMA does help pay for at least, I think, 75% of that interest. It's a bit of so they would pay for some of that interest as well. So there are other options out there, Chris, besides a rainy day fund, which we're not allowed to do.
Thanks.
But Chris, we have had discussions about what do we do in the future and what does that look like? Those discussions are still ongoing. Bard?
It strikes me that to Chris's point, if I contemplate not a rainy day or a reserve, but if we think where a lot of our expenses go that are flood related, a lot of them are roads, right?
Right.
Roads, culverts, ditches.
Swales.
So rather than just calling a rainy day reserve, and it's probably a bit late in this year's game, but in next year, maybe if we look at the pattern over a period of 5 years, we should be thinking about increasing the highway reserve specifically for these flood-related events, which is
That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And to that, so that's a good thing going forward, I think. To that point, maybe without trying to get too complicated, part of how we were able to kind of get any unassigned funds this year was utilization of 2 highway reserves. So we utilized the bridge and culvert, actually, sorry, 1 highway reserve. We utilized the bridge and culvert reserve to say that we're going to use that money to pay for the flood response. We also have this reserve, special projects reserve set up that was essentially the ARPA money that got voted on at the special meeting in November, with a caveat in there that the board could use that money for emergency funding. So we've basically depleted these two to kind of help us try to figure out some unassigned and reserve funds, noting that those are going to be the first 2 that we have to pay back when we get the money coming back in from FEMA. I think, you bring up a good point though, going forward, do we put a little more in those bridge and culvert reserve funds? Because it's certainly come in handy this year.
Right.
And every department has a reserve fund. It seems to be, last time I was here, we were talking about the fire department reserve fund.
Sure. So this is a look at our reserves. So not actually, as I look, planning and zoning does have a legal reserve, but certainly fire, highway, police, for their larger capital purchases, they have reserves. Town center has a reserve. Library, there's a reserve for that building as well, or for some library specific things over there. So there's a number of reserve funds. You'll see here we've got, I'm not sure, 20 some reserve funds. And we also have a capital plan that ties to all these reserve funds that Connie's really done a lot of nice work on over the last 4 or 5 years, so that we have actual plans of future expenses on these reserves, and a lot of these reserves have pivoted in the last 4 years to get away from taking loans for large things such as fire trucks and town plow trucks, to put that money away ahead of time and avoid paying the interest. I think we calculated over the last 15 years or something, there was a substantial hundreds of thousands, if not close to $1 million worth of interest over a number of years. So the capital plan helped us pivot away from that.
Could you scroll down just a little bit? Okay, I just figured there would be some people wondering what are the remaining ones.
Oh, sorry, I did go quickly.
Yes, so for example, the Lister education, the tree replacement, both very modest budgets, balances, but they can only be spent on that pretty much.
Yeah, and there's some that I feel like they're always sort of on the to-do list for some cleaning up. So Lister education goes back to when we had listers and not a contracted assessor. So we haven't really had anything for a person in that position to spend it on in a number of years. Another good example, let's see, is
Recreation path.
the recreation path or the tennis fund or the.
Tennis fund isn't even on here. I was wondering.
Well, maybe it's, you know what, it's weird, the auditors, I think, combined it in with soccer.
It was literally $133, give or take.
It's a couple $100. Oh, no, here it is, sorry.
$351 for Rich.
So that was one that I think 20 years ago, there was an idea to build a tennis court or a few tennis courts in town. Some fundraising started, maybe some money was spent towards planning, but all that's left is $351, and that project is long since forgotten. But because it came into the town specifically for a tennis court, it has to stay specifically for a tennis court.
Art? Well, so where you're going to, with some of these, they're restricted reserves. So we sometimes use those interchangeably. So if it's restricted, you can't use it for something else. It ends up being put in a lockbox and.
Yeah,
So.
and there's even a sort of a further, I guess, point to make on that is some of them are restricted by voters, and then voters can change the use of that fund by a vote, but others are restricted sort of by a contract of some sort. So for instance, I'm trying to think, like these scholarship funds, they came in with an outside agreement many years ago, whoever set up the scholarship fund, that it could be used for these scholarships. So the voters can't change that. Yeah, they've been sort of on the books for longer than I've been here. And I know we at various times have tried to do some forensics on it to see, well, what can we use it for? Should we be able to do a scholarship of some sort for folks? And I don't know that we've ever found really satisfactory guidance, which is why they continue to kind of sit there in the grand scheme of things.
Are they drawing interest?
I would have to look. I don't know if they are.
Because I mean,
It looks like
if
they're the
nothing
same
else,
budget.
I mean, as Bard was saying, that $351 come back in 60 years.
Yeah, you'll have a little bit of money. I'd have to double check and dive a little deeper to see. I don't off the top of my head if they're drawing interest.
Okay.
Any other?
I think it's important, you said it once, to emphasize, when that FEMA money comes in, whenever it does, that's not going to get us back on the track of always having lots of unassigned money to roll over each year. It's going to go to refill those two funds.
Right.
Yep. I mean, the goal at the end of the year is really to kind of come in on budget without an excess of expenses or too many vacancy savings. But yes, when that money comes back in, it'll go back into the budget. I could foresee, a scenario, maybe not next year, but the year after, where we get fully paid back from FEMA from even the 23 storm. There's still money coming in, and the 24 storm could create a surplus. And then we'll go back to our policy and work with that money towards the next year's budget. But that doesn't help us for FY26.
Unfortunately, I think I can almost guarantee you that we will have large expenditures for infrastructure rebuilding due to future natural disasters, just given the trend that we've seen.
I hate to agree with you, Chris, but there is a pattern.
By a lot of people.
I guess any other thoughts, questions from the board or anybody else on the budget? You know, willing to go
Art?
wherever.
I'll just, because not everybody goes to all these meetings, unlike us. So conversations that have taken place in the past include, well, if some properties go through FEMA buyout, that will have some impact on the grant list. There will be fewer tax revenues. And that still seems beyond this next fiscal year. But in some future state, if some properties go through a FEMA buyout, the town takes over the empty property, there's no tax revenue from that property. So it has some impact on us over time. And I'll point out the other obvious thing for some of our friends and neighbors, that this is the town budget that impacts where we're talking about damage to town property. We're not talking about damage to private property, and that's a whole other set of impacts to property owners, whether it's their house, their driveway, their outbuildings, their lawn, their woods, whatever it might be.
Any questions? Okay,
So long story short, we're looking at 6.83% proposed tax rate increase, which represents a net decrease in spending. As you explained, though, the evaporation of the available unassigned money is something we just have to live with.
and two things to add to that.
Mhm.
As bad as this is, and I do feel badly about this, and I think Chris alluded to this, we're in a much better situation than our neighboring towns. And this is the municipal tax rate. We don't know what the education tax will be, which is.
Right. And we also know, though, that when we put together our very first draft budget some months ago, the proposed, the initial plug in all the numbers tax increase was in excess of 20%.
Yeah.
And now we're looking at 6.83, because the reason that we're on our seventh budget meeting is because we have taken the goal of getting the tax rate as low as possible very seriously.
Yeah.
And we have cut a number of things or decided not to fund a number of things. And that's why we can honestly say we will be spending less money. In terms of the actual spending, we're spending less this year if this budget is approved than we did last year.
Yeah.
So anybody who says out of control spending by the select board, I know why they say that, but this year it's very much not true.
Are we ready for a motion? Art?
I would just add one other comment. It is difficult, as I think citizens and select board members, to think, what is it we don't want?
Hmm.
And I've said this sort of glibly before. It's a line from a movie. What don't you want? And so that's a key question for folks. What don't we want? If we think we're spending too much money, what do we not want?
Yeah.
Ian, go ahead.
Can you guys, sorry, I came into this late, but with that tax increase, do you know approximately what the annual bill for someone that has a house valued at $400,000 would be?
So I'll go to the notes here 1 second.
We have a value per 100,000, didn't we?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so multiply
multiply
that
by
by
4.
4. Let me find my note. I just want to get to the right spot. Ian, bear with me for a sec. All right. So the tax rate would be $530.83 in taxes per $100,000 property value, which is an increase of what am I putting in there? Hold on a second. Wait, pause. I think
Stand by.
I opened the wrong one.
Yeah, that's not right.
No, that was the wrong one. I'm sorry. Let me find, okay. I had it updated on notes here. Okay. All right, no, that was the right amount. So
That's not the increase, that's.
no, that's the total. So the
Right.
the total per $100,000 at 6.83 but at the tax rate as presented for FY 26 is $530.83 per 100,000. The increase from FY 25 to FY 26 is $33.93 per $100,000 of property value.
So $120.
Which admittedly is a lot of money for some people. Even that is something we would prefer not to have happen, but unfortunately, we don't see a way around it at this moment.
Hey, thanks for putting that out there.
You're welcome.
David, one thing that we've been asked, and I've looked at this occasionally, is how does this compare to other towns? And it really depends on the town. I know that perhaps the closest to us both geographically and in size and character in many ways is Heinsberg. And if I read their budget summary correctly, that's posted on their website, their expenses are shown as going up 0.81% and their general fund taxes going up 7.96%. So not that different from Richmond, perhaps.
But not quite as good either.
And not quite as good either. But then I also am aware of conversations in places like Montpelier and Barry where they got whacked, to be fair, by a couple of floods. And what I at least read is that they're talking about budget cuts and position cuts just to try to stay at a manageable tax rate. Back to what don't the taxpayers want.
Ian, is your hand still up? Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, just before I get to my question, I wanted to add about the discussion of Heinsberg's. My understanding is Heinsberg is also planning on engaging in some substantial short-term borrowing for the coming fiscal year, and I don't know whether that's because they didn't have sufficient funds in reserve to manage, their own flood-related expenses or not. But I know that's very painful for the select board over there. And I apologize because I'm sure you've talked about this before, and I couldn't make all the budget meetings. But do you happen to know offhand what the underlying increase in health insurance costs was that leads to the increases? It's not increases across all departments, but the general increase that we see here. I know some of what we're seeing is increase in costs, and some of what we're seeing is changes in staffing, right? So I was just wondering what the increase in health insurance costs on a percentage basis was, if you know that offhand.
Josh is looking that up, and while he does that, another thing, as you probably know well, is which employees opt out in a given year. And that is something that can change numbers dramatically.
Oh, maybe for perspective, while Josh is looking at this, does anybody remember roughly what the figure for a family health plan is under
30. Ballpark of 30,000.
So if we call it a ballpark of 30,000, it makes a big difference if a employee either takes the full family plan or takes the opt-out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's real money.
And it also matters how many kids they've got.
And I'll just
Yeah.
observe, 40 years ago, that was not true. Health insurance was a modest percentage of your overall costs.
Yeah.
But in the intervening years, it's really changed.
So looking at, this was information that was presented to the select board. I think it was in the October or November budget meeting, but this looks at the number of employees that were on the healthcare plan at
Could
that
you make that
time.
as big as you can? It's very
Yeah.
small right now.
Do that, sure. So this is the 2024 platinum. The total estimated costs were $242,000. That was going to go up to 266,000, so a 10% increase.
Mhm.
And again, as Bard said, the mix and the makeup of who's on or off the healthcare plans at any given point does change during open enrollment and as staffing changes. Right? I think, Connie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the 10% looks at what the rates are going up.
We did shop around a little bit as far as healthcare. We compared Blue Cross Blue Shield to MVP. As you can see here, it actually shows that on the slide there.
Yeah.
And we do offer a gold plan too. But the way we structure things is every employee who's on the healthcare program gets the town pays the same for platinum or for gold, because if you have a difference in your gold to your platinum, the town contributes to a health savings account for that employee, so that it's not like the town gets a deal on an employee, but it gives the employee some options.
And we have a person, what's the name of the firm?
Yeah, it used to be
Acrisure?
Hickok and Borman, now it's Acrisure.
Acrisure.
And they help us, analyze this and look at some different options. Every year they help us look at it. And I think the last couple of years we've had sort of the same program because it seems to work. And as we look at Blue Cross Blue Shield, those rates continue to go up higher than MVP. And feedback from employees is that MVP seems to be working. To your point, I think it was 5 years ago or so, we switched from Blue Cross Blue Shield to MVP because MVP was then lower. There was some concern, but we did a pretty thorough job of researching it. And it seems as though people are very satisfied with MVP right now.
Martha, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I missed a lot, so I'm sure I know it's been discussed, but I'm just curious, why are there now 3 town administrators? And how has that affected the budget?
Yeah, so we've always had a town manager and an administrative assistant. I think it was a couple of years ago, we changed that to an assistant to the town manager. And then I guess it was spring, the select board authorized a temporary position for an administrative assistant. And that was mostly based on a lot of the work that we had to do to respond to the flood. And this was actually before the 2024 flood even, that we got it approved, because my current assistant, Duncan, was getting very involved in reporting to FEMA as far as all the information we needed to do from 2023. We also had emergency watershed protection programs, which are working with private homeowners, but the money and a lot of the work kind of flows through the town. And we were getting an increased number of buyout and elevation projects. I think right after the board approved that, they did it temporarily. So that way we were going to use ARPA funds for that. Right after the board approved that, as I was in the hiring process, we actually had the second flood. So that's increased the number of buyout and elevation applications and EWP projects quite a bit. But in this budget, I initially started looking at, like, could we keep all 3 of those positions? But it became pretty clear that we can't keep all 3 just based on where we're at with the budget. So this budget takes the assistant to the town manager position and changes that, increases hours and changes it to a deputy town manager. And looking at the amount of work and the type of work that we've asked Duncan to do over the last couple of years, it certainly has become a more demanding position with more on his plate. It's more, I think, appropriate for a deputy town manager. So it does increase some of the admin staffing. And a lot of it is, some of it's due to the flooding, but even without the flooding, there are plenty of projects thinking about the town center, lots of projects we have going on here, installations in the park, mostly based on the ARPA money that we've received. There's constantly a traffic calming project or a grant or something else that's coming up that the admin work has definitely continued to increase.
So I'm sorry, I'm confused. So these are full-time, not temporary? One is not a temporary anymore?
Yeah, sorry, let me try to summarize it. So in the budget is myself and a deputy town manager, but that deputy town manager is basically a classification change from an assistant to the town manager, to deputy town manager. The temporary position will go away at the end of this June, which is all that it was authorized for by the select board with funding.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Next year's too.
Okay, so it's
Next year's.
ongoing, so it'll be constant, we'll have 3.
Next year, yeah. Next year, it's basically 2 staff with my position being the same and just reclassifying and adding some hours to the assistant to the town manager.
Are those assistants full full-time or part-time?
Oh, so currently the assistant to the town manager is 30 hours per week, and the 26 budget calls for that to go to 40 hours. The temporary position right now is 25 hours per week, but again, that will no longer be part of the town as of July 1st.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Jack?
I'd like to correct, there hasn't always been a town manager.
Oh, sorry.
That's
Yes,
true.
you're right in the
1840?
yeah. No, I think so.
It was
Town
a
man-
town administrator.
I think it was town administrator for the person prior to Jeff, and then Jeff, I think, started as administrator
Yeah.
for his first 2 or 3 years, and then it changed to town manager. So probably for his last 6 or 7 years, it was town manager, and for my first 6 years here, it's been town manager. So it's been about 12 years. Yes, but yes, you're right. It has not been.
Ruth Burnett was the only town employee when I got here,
I'm sure.
and one
Yes.
person in the, what do you call
I'm
it?
sure.
Septic system.
Yeah, we look back, yeah, I'm sure you're right. Sorry, I misspoke when I said there's always been. I should have couched that better.
Any further discussion? Are we ready for a motion? Bard?
I thought we'd mention the two things in the chat. First is from Connie to note, the increase in the budget does not include the other charitable contributions, and that will become clear when we look at the warrant article about how that works. And then another comment, that cost of living increase for Social Security is 2%.
It's 2.5.
So fixed incomes under Social Security are going up more slowly than most town budgets or state taxes or school taxes.
Mhm.
So, right, it is a compelling point.
Yeah.
I'll also say there are various mechanisms by people with low income get assistance with their taxes, and I'm not expert on what those are, but
Okay, any further comments? Are we ready for a vote?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the fiscal year 26 budget as presented to be sent to the voters for consideration of their approval.
Thank you, Jay. Do we have a second?
yes, David Disbard, I'll second that.
Thank you, Bart. Any further discussion?
Here. Oh, there she is.
Okay, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Lisa, I.
Bard, aye.
J.I.
David, I. Motion carries. Next, we have consideration of approving the warning for town meeting, and there have been a couple changes on this recently, so I'll turn this over to Josh.
Yeah, so there is a draft in the packet. All the articles have essentially stayed the same, but I did get some feedback from the attorney today.
Bart?
I'm thinking we just pull it up.
Yeah.
So
What I
for
might do
those
is,
of us who have not seen it,
yeah, I'll pull up the edited version from the attorney, if that makes sense to you guys. Yeah, and it's a track changes version, so it does need some cleaning up, but I think it'll work well for the purposes of our discussion. And I do like the way that he broke it up a little bit, because we have more things on Australian ballot than we ever have. So,
Can
he
you make
broke,
that much bigger?
yeah, make it bigger, thanks.
Just go to view and screen width.
Yeah, I did, just I got a million things to move on my, all the little Zoom pop-ups that come along. I gotta move those all out of the way to get to the right menu and then move them again when the pop-ups come. So let me,
Just choose page width,
where's that?
right above you, northeast. It was actually in the little box you brought up.
In here?
Huh?
Okay. Oh, and then it just, oh, look at that. That is a good shortcut. I still have to move menus, but it's shorter than what I was gonna do. So that's awesome. I'll remember that. So this, the attorney broke it up by saying, let's look at the floor vote articles first, and then go into what's gonna be voted by Australian ballot, before we sort of had them a little mixed and matched. So do we want to start with floor vote articles? And move through from there?
start at the very beginning,
Start at the beginning.
a very good place to start.
A very good place to start.
There was a big bang.
So
From there, get to the
the
end.
floor vote would talk about hear and accept reports to the town officers. Next, there is an article that we have to vote on every 5 years that asks, would we like to exempt Richmond Rescue from property taxes? And by statute, that's every 5 years. We initially had this as an Australian ballot item because when I look back for the last 5 years ago, it was a by Australian ballot. And according to Linda today, she says, as long as she can remember, it's been Australian ballot. But because the town of Richmond doesn't have public questions being voted by Australian ballot, the attorney's saying this should be by a floor vote unless we can find evidence that this specific question was asked by voters or approved by voters to be voted by Australian ballots. Which gets a little confusing, but I'll give an example. So the Conservation Commission, that is voted by Australian ballot every year. And that is because I think it was in 2010, the voters passed a motion or an article to vote that funding of that reserve fund by Australian ballot. If that had not been passed by the voters, that would also be by a floor vote. I did ask Linda to do some research in to see if there was ever a time when that got voted to move this to Australian ballot. So we'll look at that over the next few days. We'll come back at the January 21st meeting to finalize this warning with a final decision on that article at that point. I'm going to stop there because that was a mouthful, and there's probably some questions. Yeah, go ahead.
It's been noted multiple times that when we moved the budget and the, for want of a better term, the charitable contributions to Australian ballot, we did it specifically for those, and we did not choose to move all public questions to Australian ballot. Since that time, some people have said, why didn't we? And the answer is we didn't think to, or no one asked us to. But could that be an item discussed at town meeting?
If they want to move all public questions?
If we wanted to put it on there as something to discuss.
Yeah, I think that could probably go under advisory. Or I guess we've got a few more days. You could put it on there as a binding vote to move all public questions to Australian ballot. It'd be a little bit of a scramble to make sure we get that wording right in the next couple days. I think we did talk about it for the November 9th vote and decided against it because we wanted to maybe still keep some semblance of a town meeting if the budget passed to go to Australian ballot.
And I'm okay with that. I'm just asking for the benefit of people who wondered.
No, that's a good question. I guess I'd just be a little cautious about a binding vote and trying to pull that together in the next 4 days, essentially, with the correct wording. Advisory discussion, I think it'd be a wonderful idea.
Bart?
So that's where I was going, given our time frame
Right.
here and the perhaps absence of many substantive topics of conversation at town meeting, maybe that should be another advisory conversation.
God, we'll be there till noon.
What'd you say?
He said, God will be there till noon. And you have to remember, this is with a proposed starting time of 10:30.
Chris, go ahead.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Sorry, I just want to make sure nobody shows up at 10:30. I don't think they would.
They
do
might
it.
miss the whole
It'll
thing.
be done.
Well, I mean, we never know.
Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we did discuss this to some degree during the December 9th meeting, and my recollection is determined not to put it on Australian ballot at that time. I'm trying to remember though, there was some reason why, and maybe Bart and David, you can help me on this, but this got the Richmond Rescue got put on like 10 or 12 years ago, and it was during the time that Richmond Rescue was having financial difficulties, and there was some special case. Am I misremembering that?
I'm trying to remember.
It is certainly possible, but I frankly don't remember that clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it
For
is. It is
curiosity's
sort of
sake, I'll look through my notes.
yeah,
If anybody narrow it down to when it started, that would help us looking at what votes might have been to move it to Australian ballot.
yeah. I mean, I think there's the question about voting on it, but also there's the means of providing this support, because well, first of all, I believe they're a 501c3 organization, so that at some point they, like any 501c3 organization, don't they petition to the town to be relieved from property taxes? Because even though they're exempt from state and federal property taxes, they're not necessarily automatically relieved of local property taxes.
Right.
And was there, I'm trying to remember the reason why they weren't given an exemption in perpetuity the way that's typically done for other 501c3s.
I'm
That's,
guessing, Chris, that by statute, it's done in 5-year blocks, but that's an assumption on my part. I'll have to go back and see what I can find.
Yeah, I actually just read through 32 VSA section 3840, which is referenced here in the article just earlier this afternoon, as a chance may have it. It looks like when it's first voted on, it can be voted for a period of 10 years, and every subsequent vote after that is, I think, no more than 5 years. But Chris, to your other question about if there's other 501c3s that are exempt from property taxes without a vote, I do not know how that works.
yeah, I mean, something to think about is I wonder whether we're tracking the other 501c3s in town to know whether whether they're current with that process, if that's the one that they're all supposed to be subject to.
A good question.
Because
So
I did think you could do it permanently, but I don't know why I think that.
and there might be a nuanced difference between Richmond Rescue. Well, we can pull the statute up and take a look. 32 VSAs, 40. Maybe that's specific to rescue organizations. I don't know. Was let me see 32. And there's the statute.
Right.
So it looks like it is specific to volunteer fire and ambulance and rescue companies.
Or
Well,
Mace,
It's for a charitable purpose. Those are just given as examples.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about, NOFA and
Lodge.
yeah.
No, that's a good question. I don't know any history on it. And I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing how NOFA would fit under this, but North Star Lodge definitely would.
Good.
Could.
And do they, well, I guess both of those examples do own their property, right? No, it's not renting. They own they own the
Yeah, North
property.
Star Lodge owns
Yeah.
that whole.
I think they own the whole
Right.
property, yeah.
Could we just stipulate it's possible that there are other nonprofit organizations in town that have never approached the town for relief from property taxes?
Yeah.
That is plausible, is it not? Let's
Yeah.
suspect that there's at least more than one or more,
State Land Trust right down here.
as an example.
I mean, there's probably the full range, right? Ones that
Yeah.
that have been receiving it or maybe overdue for review, ones that never requested it, and then ones that I know we did have some that were paying payments in lieu of taxes.
Mhm.
But that would be good to get formalized a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
So this might be a question if we start with a baseline of what organizations are not paying property taxes other than Richmond Rescue, if any. And what organizations are making a payment in lieu of taxes, if any. And then behind that, what is the authority or obligation of the voters to approve them?
That covers it, I think.
Yeah.
We were looking at the articles and I stirred up the water.
Oh, sorry. That's right.
So, yeah, the idea of having it as an advisory discussion is fine by me.
Or want to add that on about public questions to Australian ballot advisory?
Yeah,
I think that makes sense.
I guess there's more to do.
If we're looking for more to do, then sure.
David, I was gonna add a potential benefit of Article 2 here is that it may spur exactly this conversation about other organizations. Are there
Yeah.
others that are included that get it without a vote? Are there others that want a vote? And we won't be able to vote on it at town meeting, but it might be a fruitful conversation.
Yeah.
So those are the floor vote articles. We'll add in one about discussion of public questions to Australian ballot. That'll give us 4 articles essentially. For floor vote. Oh, no, sorry, 5. This is getting covered up.
Okay, so accept the town officer's reports.
Can you define decomposed? What do you mean by that?
Wait, what? Okay, where are you seeing that? Sorry.
Article 3.
Article 3. Article in presenting a
The idea, Jack, for
I see. I
decomposed
wrote
is
that differently.
some towns have said, we're gonna have the police budget be voted on separately from the highway budget, which would be voted separately from everything else. So they could vote up the police budget and vote down the highway budget.
But we're not.
We don't do it that way, but that's what that discussion is for.
Overall budget, municipal budget, or breaking it down line by line? Bart?
And I think there may be some latitude on the select board's authority about how do you want to present it to the voters? Do you present it all together? Or do you present it as departments? And so this is really advisory to, as I understand it, the select board's authority in presenting a budget to the voters. How do you want to see it? And an example, you might be in a town where this department gets approved and that department does not. And then you got to go back and revise that department's budget and try to get it approved at ostensibly a lower.
Figure out how that affects.
But one of the nice things would be, when a whole budget goes down, which of course around here, we've been very fortunate, but when a whole budget goes down, you don't know what part was the sticking point. Was it the overall bottom line or was it some part of it? If you
So
split
that's for future reference.
right.
Right.
So if you split into 3 and people vote down one budget, but support the other 2, well, then you know what the objection was.
Back to my question of
Yeah.
what is it you don't want?
Right.
Can you give a little bit about the history of how this article ended up, being placed on the ballot in this way, though? Is that, Jay, did you propose it for the reasons you just stated, or did it come from somewhere else?
Come up in casual and formal conversation numerous times over the last couple of years.
Bart?
It also came up in a conversation about the library budget, over which, to repeat, the select board does not have direct authority, the library trustees do. So it's sort of, in some ways, it's probably not clear to many voters that the library trustees set the items in the library budget, and then that goes out to voting. And there can be conversations between the select board and the trustees, but the trustees ultimately have the authority to put forward a budget.
And the town doesn't vote on that budget.
It votes on it now as part of, it has under the total budget.
Right.
Under Article 3, you could split it out and say, I want to look at that separately and vote that up or down, or
Well, that's
police,
opening up a whole new can of worms.
many cans of worms.
Yes. Yes.
Several
okay.
cans of
Anything else on floor vote, or do we want to move on?
Number 4 is everything else,
Yeah, so that would be your,
generic new business.
anything anybody wants to talk about, and bring forward at that point.
Bart?
Except modifications to the budget that's voted on Australian ballot. So a reminder to people, you can't show up to town meeting and modify the budget. That is a yes or no Australian ballot vote. You can talk about the budget, I guess, but you can't modify it. which is really different from historical
And it
practice.
doesn't make any difference how you're only talking to 1,300 people and there's 2,000 are voting. Right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the impetus, I think, why people wanted the Australian ballot is to get more people participating on the budget up or down.
Yeah. But
Well, 4 more people.
Yes. A modest number in that meeting, yes.
So then moving on to the Australian ballot articles, we would have to elect school and town officers for terms posted on the ballot. We have the budget vote, which we'd fill in here with the actual amount the board just approved this evening. Then we would get into Conservation Commission, which is an annual article by Australian ballot that voters should be fairly familiar with. If this is approved, it adds 1% on the tax rate for FY 26 to go and raise money towards the Conservation Reserve Fund.
I'm sorry, Josh, you said 1%, it's 1 cent, right?
1 cent. Yes, I misspoke. Thank you. Sorry. 1 cent. So what is that? $10 per 100,000 in value.
I think so.
And as Bard stated earlier, that is not in the budget as presented for FY 26, and I'll get into this a little bit when we get into our notes. When we compare the bottom line expenses for FY 26 as proposed right now and say that it's a reduction from FY 25. FY 25 includes the Conservation Fund and the articles voted separately for charitable appropriations. So if those are all added in, then the budget we have right now is slightly up, but they're all separate ballot items. And then next we have, I think it's 9 charitable appropriations. Last year, those were at town meeting. Remember, these are all via voice vote, but the vote on November 9th changed these to all be Australian ballot. We'll make sure that I've got these online right now, but I'll make sure as we get to town meeting, so a little bit, more publicized where you can find these. Each one of these organizations submitted a request to the select board. It's multiple pages. They justify their request. They talk about their organization. So there's lots of information about each of these organizations that voters can research before the vote.
Art? So, and I remember some comments at our meeting that some people, I don't know how many of our voters were offended that we're even contemplating this. But I'll observe that for many years, these were just embedded in the budget. So you can either, one might be offended that we're voting on them. You might be more offended that they were part of the town appropriation before and just embedded in the overall budget. So this is back to what is it you don't want? That voters can either say, I do want to raise taxes for this purpose, or I do not want to raise taxes for this purpose, one by one. And it becomes an a la carte vote versus voting the entire budget up or down.
you know, that list that you ran through so fast right there,
Oh, sorry.
people will see that ahead of time. It
Yes,
It'll be on, literally on the ballot.
It is the ballot, yes or no?
Okay.
it'll be on the warning, it'll be
Okay.
on the ballot.
I want to make
and
sure that was.
There's supplemental documents on the website, and if you want me to print any out for you, I can do that too.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can do that.
Just run it real fast.
I mean, I could go through each one of these, but, I don't know what the appetite is for that, and honestly, I'm not that well versed on each request.
Is there a place that people could find this, like who put in the chat how to find your way to the request forms?
Yeah, let me. I'll make a better town meeting page as we finalize
Get
everything.
closer.
Yeah, but I think I've got one right now that I could put into the chat. Let me find that.
While you're looking for that, Josh, if I could, David,
Yeah, go ahead.
I had the foresight perhaps to bring the 2023 annual report, and noting that 2024 is not yet printed, is still like in final tweaks. But last year's official warning had voice votes on a bunch of things. In all these articles, like dollars for Vermont Family Network, it was a separate article that people could vote up or down, but it was by voice vote. So the difference now, because we're doing Australia ballot on the financial items, it goes from voice vote to the actual ballot, yes or no. So the content is similar, but the process is different, going from voice vote at town meeting to Australian or paper ballot.
And there'll be more people voting on it.
And as Jack Lynn just observed, there will be more people voting on it, because it will be everyone who walks through for 5 minutes and votes will say yes, no, or leave it blank, as opposed to not having the time or inclination to
Right.
participate in the entire town meeting.
So this is actually all underneath the select board page on the website. So go to the select board page. I just put the link in the chat too, and I'll make this more
Awesome.
prominent on the website as we get to town meeting and finalized materials. Go underneath the select board, which is found up here. Scroll down, we've got the FY26 budget material link here towards the bottom of the page. That opens up to this page. I haven't kept this as current as we should. The last version of the budget was from November, but this does have all of the appropriation requests. Now, I'll clean this up, because some of these were included in the budget. So I think the guidance from the attorneys, if I remember correctly, if that organization is providing some sort of direct benefit to the town, like
Service.
or service, then those could be in the budget, and then the other ones will be out of the budget. So I'll clean this up to order these in a way that people will know, like, oh, these are voted separately, these are in the budget. Right now, this is just every appropriation request we had. But if anybody's curious, they're all here, and I will make sure that it looks better here in the next week or so. Yes.
Quick question. If the Little League should win the Little League World Series, does that come with money? And if so, does it have to be put back in the town budget?
No, Little League doesn't pay anybody or award money to anybody. I mean, they pay their staff, but they don't even pay umpires who show up to the Little League World Series on TV. Yeah, the kid, although so sort of side note, I'll take 30 seconds. Burlington American Little League won the Vermont State Championship this year and went down to Connecticut to compete in the regionals. And I talked to one of the fathers of that, and he said it was an amazing experience for the kids. They got like a bus ride down, they got all this lodging and food for the weekend. They were treated like royalty. They had a blast. But no, they did not come home with checks.
Who paid for it?
Little League paid for that.
The national organization?
The Little League paid for I think they didn't pay for transportation, but they paid for their lodging. They have like dorms on site for these kids.
Yeah.
And then if they had won there in Connecticut, they would have been all loaded on a bus and driven to Williamsport.
Yeah.
Like it's a really, really great organization when you get to that level, for sure. But no, to your question, there's no cash that comes with winning the World Series.
This isn't college football.
This isn't college football.
The kids don't have NIL.
No NIL, I will say yet. So that goes through the articles. Then what I did add here at the bottom, we are statutorily required to have a informational meeting within 30 days of the vote. I put down to have two, because I think we should do one.
On a Saturday.
Wait a minute. Did he take? Oh, no, sorry. I was looking. He
I know it
took out.
shows one.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what I'm
no,
saying.
so he took my second one out. I'll have to talk to the attorney. I think we should still do two. Let me pull up the initial warning, and I apologize again, like I didn't really review his notes just yet. I have my pre-attorney review here. And maybe we can only have one official meeting, but either way, I think we should still do one on Tuesday, February 11th, which is on or about the day that advanced early voting will begin, so that people will have a chance as they get their ballot and have 30 days or so to cast it. They can come to a meeting, hear more about the budget, ask questions, hear more about the Australian ballot items as well. And then we'll do another one on Monday, February 24th, which is closer in as people who might want to wait a little bit longer or want to vote on the actual voting day.
You have them here?
Yeah, we've done them in this room before and it's been okay. And with this and Zoom, I think that we would probably be okay.
Josh, just throwing this out there, is there any reason we couldn't or shouldn't legally have one on a Saturday morning?
No, we could.
The reason I say that is because this time of the year, there are a number of people who just do not like to drive after dark.
Mhm.
And I think we'd be disenfranchised. Of course, they could do Zoom, but some people don't do Zoom.
Yeah.
It would be my preference that one of those be Saturday morning at 9 or 10, but that's just, I'm just 20% of the board.
I think having two, making it at different times and days makes sense. The goal being to get a different group of people who are able and willing to come, right? So if we did like the 15th or something,
Yeah, let me just check.
6 in the morning, Wednesday.
I'm with you.
At your house?
Yeah, that's fine.
Let me see. I'm gonna check in my calendar to see what Saturday mornings I would probably be around. You're thinking we had the 11th. So Bart, you throw it the 15th?
I just threw it out because it's
Yeah.
between the 11th and the 24th.
I will say this, February 15th, I'm not going to be in the country.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean I have to be there because I don't contribute much.
You'd be listening mostly.
Yeah, let's go with that.
For the 15th, I might be able to make that morning work. Tara and Doug might be out of town. I might be home with Gavin by myself, but
The 8th?
do that. The 8th,
Amtrak in 3 minutes.
Are you?
the 8th might be,
Or do you base it on the map?
8th might be better.
Tuition.
If you have an-
Why don't we say the 8th or the 15th and we can finalize it at the next meeting? Does that work for you guys?
When do we have to finalize
We're,
this?
we're not gonna finalize this warning until next Tuesday anyway.
But it has to be 30 days in advance. And we're still
Josh,
doing-
can I throw out the idea that you want one before the ballots go out?
That was the idea of the February 11th one, because I think you had said ballots are going out around then, like the 10th or so.
I want to say the 12th. Don't quote me on that.
The 8th would make more sense.
So then if the 8th would make more sense, I think that's where you're going, right, Linda?
Yes.
Um,
So why don't we try to do the 8th unless there's a reason not to, the 8th, like 10 o'clock? Morning,
sure.
or 6 o'clock at Jackson's?
Yeah.
I'm up for 4:30 in the morning. We'll go for a 5-mile run before that, and then we'll come in and talk about the budget. No, yeah, I think the 8th should work. Let me just I'll confirm my schedule, but I don't think I have any conflicts for then at 10 a.m. It's probably better for me than the 15th. So great. And I'll ask the attorney if there's a reason we can't have two on the agenda, or on the warning.
One of them can be unofficial, as you said.
Yeah,
that's-
that's the
I-
fallback.
I mean,
I
how do you
think-
tell them
yeah.
apart which one was the officials?
I don't know. I think having two though is going to be helpful. We've done that in the past when we had Australian ballot due to COVID restrictions. And I thought, we never got a huge turnout at either, but it was helpful to have two so that people had opportunities to hear it at the beginning of voting and right towards the end. So, okay, so I would like to stop
It
sharing.
costs to get Sweet Simone's to cater it.
Hmm.
We get more people.
Okay, and then the other one we'll keep. I put on Monday, February 24th. That's a week.
Well, that's a good point. Senior Center, maybe they'd like to make some money selling stuff at the morning meeting.
I guess if they would like to. I mean, I think we're gonna have it I mean, I was just planning on having it in this room,
Send them an
given
apple cider
historical
donut.
attendance.
Well, the point is, if we genuinely want people to pay attention, having it in such a way that, you know, if we have it across, I know MMC TV is less fond of going across the street because they have to set it all up. But if we did make it a plain that coffee and stuff would be for sale, and the seniors themselves who would be running it would be there, we might actually get some people for one. I'm just throwing that out there.
It's an unknown. Well, why don't we set it up and then they could decide if they want
Yeah, we can let them know and we'd leave the rest of their
devices.
Okay, so that I think takes us to the end of the warning. And then we'll clean this up and look at the Richmond Rescue question and the 2 informational meeting questions and come back with a finalized version next Tuesday.
Now, we don't legally have to have a translation in French, right?
I don't believe so,
Okay.
but my 8th grade French student can maybe help with
No.
some basic wording. Okay,
So we will close this out on January 21st.
yeah, and then I will take it hot off the presses, give it to Linda so that she can hurry up and put it in the book for publication.
So are we ready for consideration? I know, review
Yeah,
of
we're
public
gonna-
notes.
Yeah. We'll
Budget
review the
notes.
notes. Sure.
Amtrak should be here now.
Every meeting, he lets me know how long it is till Amtrak comes through.
You guys and your train schedules.
Yeah.
You're Swiss in a former life or something.
If you've ever, you know, their TV programs on places like RFD TV, where all they do is they set the camera up right before a big long freight comes by and they film the entire freight coming by. And people are sitting there at home going,
Wow.
eating popcorn and watching that train go by.
And you?
It's amazing. Okay. So moving on to budget notes, I'm going to use Jay's trick here. Um,
Page width.
Page width. Yep. I was just trying to get there. What you can't see is I've got this little zoom bar that moves around. So I have to move that every time I try to.
I like how you moved the Zoom bar that we can't see,
Yeah.
so you could show us.
Yeah, see, it's, yeah. So anyway, so sometimes it takes me an extra couple seconds to get there. So this came out of a discussion at the last meeting to try to provide some better context to the budget. So what I did was I really went back towards my town meeting presentation that I do every year and tried to pull out some of the highlights. As I was doing that, it looked like I divided it into 2 sections, sort of general budget notes and budget notes specific to the 26 budget. Yes, Bart.
That orphan sentence, the notes are divided in 2 sections, is calling for a colon.
Let me see, I'm gonna make sure I get it on a,
This costs money. We can't afford that.
There's no extra charge for the colon.
More ink to wait to dry.
All right, I'm just gonna make sure.
Where's the damn train man?
It's late.
This doesn't have my. Sorry, I want to get the right one.
We just make a note of that.
Yeah, no, I was gonna get one so I can make some notes on it. I specifically pulled one aside that was gonna have the ability to make some notes. Give me a second, I want to get to the right one. Here we go. This is the one I wanted to look at. Okay, I will get back to sharing that. I'm gonna do Jay's trick before I even share this. Okay. There we go. All right, so. You would like a column there. Gotcha. Good call. So general budget notes, which are hopefully sort of true for all budgets and just sort of some general information and then specific to FY26. So I'll try not to read these word for word, but because everybody can read at home. But a note here about the majority of the municipal budget is approved by the select board to go to the voters with feedback from the town staff. The library section is really approved by the trustees with feedback from the library director and included in the budget that's voted on by the voters. Water and sewer is completely separate and completely separate process. So took some bullet points from my presentation in the past, try to make sure that people are really aware that that's a separate process in May. And the budget that's presented in the town report is the current fiscal year 25 budget, and the 26 budget will be voted on in May. It is not in any way part of the tax rate. Yeah.
Well, strictly speaking,
So two things. First, water and sewer is probably another colon. And then the water and sewer rates are paid by the customers. This is, I think, where Jay was going, are paid by the customers of the water and sewer department. You might add that the
Exact.
town pays a fire protection fee to the water system for the purposes of providing water in case of a fire, including hydrants.
so there is that very small percentage of the town budget.
Yeah, so I think the concept, it didn't come up with a wording yet, but something like that. We used to call it fire water, but that's the right word.
I think it's a liquor now.
That comes out of the spill.
I'll just make a highlight here. I know that I gotta go back and just wordsmith a little bit, but that's a good point. We'll make sure we add that. So that covers water and sewer. Also put a note that the town is responsible for collecting taxes for the municipal budget and for the school. So these amounts are combined on the tax bill. The school tax is generally 70% of the combined total municipal and school taxes.
I think, and I'm sorry to wordsmith
No,
this, but I
that's why
don't
we're
think
doing
we
it.
should use the phrase your tax bill
Okay.
The tax bill.
or tax bills.
No, that's a good point. I might have a few other you and yours here later on, but this is good to go through that. Then I explained reserve funds and unassigned funds. So reserve funds function like savings accounts. We talked a bit about them at the beginning of the meeting, where there's a reserve fund for capital equipment for the fire department, and that money goes towards things like fire trucks. And there's a capital plan that ties in with that. Unassigned and restricted funds are essentially surpluses left over. Unassigned funds is all departments except for highway, and restricted funds is highway. I think that statute might have changed, but essentially money raised for a highway department needs to stay with highway.
Right.
And money raised for other purposes can kind of float in between other departments as well as be used for highway. So when we have a flood, that money can go be used towards highway. So we tried to explain this here with a few bullet points as well. About the unassigned funds, we talked about the 15% of the budget that we try to keep on hand, and that goes towards making the budget each year.
Bart?
The first sub bullet, which is now at the top, funds can be added to the reserves yearly from tax net revenue, and that amount is decided by the voters as part of the town budget. Because it's not separate articles on each reserve fund.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions on reserve funds and unassigned and restricted funds?
Okay.
Well, no, then the next part, I'm
Now for
on to
excitement.
part two.
Oh.
Budget notes specific to the FY 26 budget. I always found that explaining fiscal years at the beginning of the presentation is helpful.
Yeah.
So people understand where we're at with that. So we touched on this a bit already, that spending from FY 25 to 26 is down by $45,000. I looked at the two total expenses here in FY 25 and FY 26. Did get feedback prior to this meeting, but after I posted this on Friday, that we should talk a bit about Conservation Reserve Fund and charitable appropriations, both of which are voted on separately from the main budget. If the Conservation Reserve Fund and charitable appropriations all pass in FY 26, this would add $99,000 to the budget, which would result in an increase of expenses of $54,000 or 1.11% from FY 25 to FY 26.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Somebody asked this a few meetings back, so I don't recall it coming up tonight. It's been taken as almost read that every year the Conservation Reserve Fund thing will, I don't know that it's ever gone down. But there would be some interest in knowing what is the current balance of that fund and what are the total how much has been drawn from it in the last, 24 months? Because people might like to know, do we need that? I mean, that 1%,
Sure.
that 1 cent, I mean.
Yeah, and that will be in the town report. We'll have a starting and an ending number.
I
for
just think it might go here in the notes too, is all.
that.
Unless you think that would make making it too wordy.
I could do.
You could put that part
do
in
a
French.
fund, maybe a fund balance as of the end of fiscal year 24, because that's sort of a
Well,
moment.
that
in
would be half
time
of it. The other half
audited.
would be how much have we used in the last couple of years? If that's
Um,
something we could do.
Yeah, I know that the Conservation Fund usually puts together a presentation, or Conservation Commission usually puts together a presentation with
Yeah.
a lot of information on it.
Okay.
So maybe we could ask for like language from them,
Mhm.
because I think you're right. Historically, they've described this and it has come up when we voted on this as on the budget by voice vote. I think this came up almost every year as a discussion.
Certainly
item.
frequently
Yeah,
and debatable.
Yeah.
Debated,
at least in the past.
yes.
Trying to think about it. You could, I mean, they literally have like a 12 slide PowerPoint presentation on it.
Yeah.
So maybe a note to see more information in the town report. Let me see.
Right, by the time people vote on this, they will have the town report.
They
So,
should, yeah, and they'll have it on the website too, and we'll have those meetings that we'll explain that in more
We
detail
need to
too.
really double down though and making sure people know where to get it.
Yes.
So then go to some tax rate, which again, we talked about a bit earlier. That this is an additional $33.93 in taxes from FY 25 to 26. But it's per $100,000 of property value, but it's a total of $530.83 per $100,000 of property value.
Right.
And it's all based on an estimation of FY 26 grand list. The actual grand list will get finalized when the board finalizes the tax rate in June or July.
is that a typo at the end of the first line on the screen here? And based on and.
Yeah,
There's an
that's
extra
right.
D, right?
Probably. Yep, it is a typo. Thank you. I did explain, we talked about this when we reviewed the budget, that we used $433,000 in unassigned funds in FY 25. And this year, there's only $78,000 available, and that helps go towards the tax rate increase. Explained a bit more about the Conservation Reserve Fund and how that would affect the tax rate increase if it passes. And then it's an additional $10 in taxes per $100,000 of property value if 1 cent is added to the tax rate. And a note then here on social service appropriation requests. If all of them pass, it adds $19,375 to the budget and would increase the estimated tax rate increase from 6.83 to 7.31. And it's $2.41 in taxes for $100,000 in property value. Oh, I thought I had a note on how much that would. Oh, yeah, so it's $2.41. If everything passes, it's $2.41 per 100,000.
It strikes me that in this bullet and the preceding bullet on the conservation fund, they both start with an assumption that's going from 6.83 to something else. Maybe we just say what the percentage increase, because you can't go, if both are approved,
Yeah,
we don't end up at we end up at neither 8.84 nor 7.31. But a figure higher than 8.84, right?
yeah.
Because it would be a cumulative total of the additional percentages. And it's awkward because you can't tell what the final percentage is going to be until things are passed or not.
Can't tell
In
the players.
appropriations, it's possible that some are approved and some are not,
Right.
in which case,
Yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, I had fun with this at the
Yeah.
for the presentation, trying to figure out. I remember I had like 5 different charts in the last presentation because of just that. What if one passes and not the other? But I think, yeah, it would.
does this make sense to other people? I appreciate the quandary. You'd kind
Yeah.
of like to go, it goes from A to B, but
Yeah.
it's,
There's other variables.
yeah,
Would add, so I guess in this case, it would add like 0.5% to the tax rate increase.
something like that,
I
yeah.
just always get, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like, does that mean that the tax rate increase goes up by 0.5% of the total, or I guess 0.5 percentage points on it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Like, is it 5% of 5%, or is it 5 plus 5 equals 10? I'll try to find a way to wordsmith that so it's clear.
Yeah.
And then I gave a general, just because these can get voted up or down, someone might say, well, what does $1,000 do to my tax rate?
That's a good one.
12 cents per $100,000. So if you want to vote for the $1,000 appropriation to whichever charity you have, that's what you get. And those are the notes.
Questions, comments? Okay. Oh,
David, I
Bart?
just say, I think this is helpful. I think it's, if our quest for transparency, especially when we're headed towards Australian ballot, and people may be showing up, and I think the more succinct information we can give people, the better in terms of voting. And then also having the town report and other materials as backup for those who want to take deeper dives, so to speak.
So, good hand up.
Go ahead.
Me?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I've heard comments from a lot of people over the years that they wish they could know where the increases came from. By the time it's presented in a ballot, it's kind of too late to change it. But I think you've done a great job of explaining exactly that. Here's where that came from. Here's the impact of it by itself. As much as you can. Things are variable. As you say, if all items are not voted on, then the budget changes. But I think this is a great effort. And if there'll be somebody that doesn't like it, we'll hear about that too. But I think most people will. So thank you. A lot of work, but thanks.
Well, thanks, Lisa, and we'll have more information at those 2 budget meetings as well.
Right.
I'll have a larger slide deck and more time to get into each department and some of the bigger drivers of the budget in those meetings. And I think, like we've talked about, the goal will be to take that slide deck, put that online so people can read through it, and also post the video from that first meeting ahead of time, so people who can't attend the meeting have a chance to watch the video if they are so interested.
Are we ready to move on?
I don't know any reason not to.
Okay, item D, consideration of selecting a person to dedicate the town report to. Open for discussion.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get out in front of it because I'm gonna have to say what we're all thinking. It's awkward to make this proposal with the person we're wanting to honor on the call, but she's here. Our town clerk is retiring. Do we want to dedicate the town report to our retiring town clerk? We can entertain other possibilities, obviously. Do we want to dedicate it to the town little league program? I mean,
I think Linda is far more deserving.
I think so as well. I would support that. I do support that.
Traditionally, the town report's dedicated to somebody who's had a big impact on the community and for an eventful reason. Linda's the voice of the town. She knows everyone. She's a great resource for institutional knowledge. She's been a dedicated servant to the town for decades. So in my mind, there's nobody more deserving than Linda.
and the person to whom the report is dedicated does get coupons at the Greenie stand. Lisa, thoughts?
Thoughts on which? The dedication?
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. I can't come up quickly with anyone more deserving than Linda. There's several people who are as deserving, but I think given her time schedule, and this is the opportunity to do that uniquely, I think Linda is the one.
Chris, go ahead.
I certainly support dedicating the town report to Linda. Also, I did want to just we have another distinguished candidate, and I did want to point out that Linda is technically retiring in 2025, and that perhaps it would be appropriate to dedicate the town report to Harriet Riggs, who passed away in April of 2024.
Can I just throw something out there that I'm not sure if everybody realizes that we have, I'm not trying to push anything, but we have dedicated our town report 2 or 3 times to Mrs. Riggs.
Oh, have we?
I mean, I could certainly put something in there, if you'd like.
Yeah, we dedicated it to her 2 or 3 years ago, in
When she had her
recognition of her
100th
100th birthday, and she was actually able to come and receive it in person.
Oh, that's right.
Right,
I'm
and then
sorry,
one time it was to her and her husband.
I had completely forgotten that, and I withdraw my proposal.
Mr. Chairman, not trying to cut off discussion, but to have a motion on the floor, I move to dedicate the town report to our town clerk, Linda Parent.
David Disbard, I will second that motion.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Bart. And I also want to point out that not only is she Richmond's town clerk, but she is also Vermont's Clerk of the Year.
Ah,
I don't
Good
think.
point.
So, absent any further discussion, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Lisa, aye?
Bard, aye.
Jay, aye.
David, aye. Thank you, Linda.
Mhm.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure serving the town of Richmond.
You
Mr.
can
Chairman,
keep serving if you'd like.
since we have a regularly scheduled select board meeting next week, the usual items for next agenda are kind of moved. So I move we adjourn.
Thank you, Jay. Do we have a second?
David Disbard, I will second that motion.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion for adjournment to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Lisa, aye?
Bard, aye.
Jay, aye.
David, aye. We are adjourned at 8:32 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.